Brilliant. Okay, so next we have Mark Carine from the Natural History Museum, and he's going to talk about for the curious and interested collaborations to unlock the botanical collections of Sir Hans Sloane.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, it's interesting to reflect on Kate's talk earlier, actually. And I think it's almost like a curator's perspective on that same kind of interaction, perhaps, between natural history collections and people coming from other disciplines to look at our collections. Before I start, just to note that I will make reference to colonialism and enslavement in this talk, and also I will discuss a project specifically that's been examining the use of plants by enslaved people. So the focus of my talk today is the large, complex and challenging botanical collections that were assembled by this man, Hans Sloane, whose portrait is shown here in front of part of those botanical collections. Sloane was born in Killyleagh, not far from here on the banks of Strandford Lough in 1660. When he was 19, he travelled to England, where he trained as an apothecary, and then he took a medical degree, and in 1687 travelled to Jamaica as physician to the Duke of Albemarle, the colonial governor of the island, before returning to London in 1689. He developed a hugely successful medical practice. He married Elizabeth Langley Rose, the widow of a Jamaican plantation owner, and he acquired considerable wealth. And during the course of his long life, he also amassed a vast collection comprising not only botanical collections, but also other natural history specimens, coins, medals, miscellanea, books, prints, manuscripts. When he died in 1753, at the age of 93, Sloane bequeathed his collection to the nation on condition that a public museum be housed to create it, and the British Museum was duly established. The Natural History Museum and the British Library were separated from that in the late 19th and 20th centuries, and so Sloane's collection can really be considered part of the foundation collection of those three institutions. Sloane's collection is an unusual part of our herbarium. It contains specimens that draw you in, I think, in their unusual arrangement. The specimens on the left were collected in the early 1700s, but are mounted on a 16th century Venetian legal text. On the right is this wonderful page of carefully organized and labeled mosses. And I think both really beg questions about the process of collecting and assembling and storing collections during this period. I think his collection can make us question our understanding of what a botanical collection is and what it's for. This is a small part of Sloane's vegetable substances collection, of which 8,500 survive, mainly arranged in these numbered boxes. The boxes are made of glass and wood, and the specimens they contain are sealed inside with marbled paper. And each one is then catalogued in a 3-volume catalogue in Sloane's hand. In some ways, it's a bit like a modern carpological collection, but I've never come across anything directly comparable. What was this collection for? Why was it arranged in this way? Why was it stored in this way? Sometimes his collections can surprise. This portrait in seaweed was unexpected when I first came across it. And I certainly wasn't expecting the head of a woodpecker to be pressed in the herbarium. They don't press well, as you can imagine. A few years ago, we published a paper looking at the ways in which the botanical collections at the Natural History Museum are used. And as good taxonomists, we developed a way of classifying uses of the collection that drew inspiration from the late Vicky Funk's paper on 100 uses for the herbarium, well, at least 72. And the graph shows the interests of visitors to the Natural History Museum botanical collections during 1 year. And I think the point I really wanted to make here is that Sloane's collection can be used to address questions across that broad spectrum. Some specimens have significance as in botanical nomenclature, or images based on those are nomenclatural types, and the printed version of the image on the left here is actually the type of a Linnaean name, which is based, the image is clearly based on the specimen on the right. Specimens provide evidence that a particular species was growing at a particular place at a particular time, of course. And as such, they provide a source of data to inform our understanding of our changing environment. And here in Sloane's collection, you can see in the center a specimen of Trachythiopsis erythroxylon. Top right is a specimen of Trachythiopsis melanoxylon. They were both collected in St. Helena in the South Atlantic in around 1700. Erythroxylon is extinct in the wild. Melanoxylon is globally extinct. The herbarium is a record of that change. And of course, new tools such as DNA sequencing now allow us to research those kind of specimens in entirely new ways. The collection contains specimens that can inform understanding of our relationship with plants through time. This folio shows a specimen collected by Samuel Brown, an East India Company surgeon in Chennai in the 1690s. In addition to the specimen, you also have a palm leaf fragment with the Tamil name written on it, and also details of the uses of that particular plant. And these sort of specimens can help us to understand how plant names and uses in this region of the world have changed over the last 300 years. And of course, the uses of these collections extend beyond natural sciences. This absolutely amazing Opuntia specimen on the right came from the Duchess of Beaufort, who was responsible for introducing into Britain a wide array of garden plants. And those specimens can be used to help elucidate the networks that she used to establish those collections. Historical herbaria can also inform our understanding of encounters between cultures, and of course they varied hugely in their nature. This specimen, just 2 leaves, was collected by Edward Bartar on the west coast of Africa. The illustration shows Bartar's small castle next to the English castle at Cape Coast that was a key infrastructure in the trade in enslaved people. Bartar both collected plants and traded in enslaved people. He was a valued correspondent of some of the most eminent English natural historians of the day, and he was a slave trader highly valued by the Royal African Company. The context in which such collections were made has come under increasing scrutiny over the last decade and a half, and rightly so. In his will, Sloane specified that his collections should be made as useful as possible towards satisfying the desire of the curious as for the improvement, knowledge and information of all persons. And as curator of Sloane's collections today, making those collections as useful as possible remains an integral part of my job. And over the last few years, a particular focus has been on improving the discoverability, the digital discoverability of those collections. It's not been without challenges, but we've made some progress and we've learned a huge amount along the way. And collaborating and connecting has been absolutely integral to that. One of the challenges is the size of the collection, just the scale. There are more than 120,000 herbarium specimens in 335 bound abortifacients and 8,500 of those vegetables and vegetable substances. It's a big collection. I think it's the biggest collection from the pre-Linnaean period. A second challenge is its physical arrangement and its condition. Many items are vulnerable, as you can probably appreciate for a collection of this age. Imaging specimens in bound volumes is also not straightforward. And a third challenge concerns the data relating to the collection that are highly distributed and don't conform with what we might expect of botanical collections. This makes navigating the collection hard. Finding those specimens of interest is far from straightforward. In 1958, Dandy published this work that documents the contents of each author's siccus with details of the people and places recorded. An essential resource, we use it every day, but it's incomplete and there are gaps and it isn't a taxonomic index. If you're interested in a particular species, this is the index that you have to use. To catalogue the species in Sloane's herbarium, he used John Ray's Historia Plantarum, published in 3 volumes between 1686 and 1704. That sought to describe all of the species then known. And in the margins, next to each name, you can see references to particular specimens in the herbarium. And then there were lots of additions that he included in the headers and footers. And this annotated copy of John Ray's Historia Plantarum is still the catalogue we use today to find specimens. There's no other way to find specimens of a particular species. So at the core of what we've been trying to do is to make digitally available those catalogues, those tools that we use to navigate the physical collection today. It's not digitization, as you might generally understand it, but providing a way at the scale of the entire collection to link the physical collection and the catalogues, to allow people to query what specimens it contains, who collected them, where they were collected from. And it's very much, as I said, a work in progress. I've got a raised hand. Don't know if that means anything.
No.
No, ignore it. Right, thank you. Two people have been absolutely critical to the work that we've been able to do so far. The first is Vicky Pickering, historian of science and collections, who studied Sloane's vegetable substances for a PhD and more recently held a postdoc on the Sloane Lab project at the NHM. And Vicky worked extensively on the Sloane Lab, on the vegetable substances data and also on the annotated copy of Ray. And Brad Scott, also a historian, worked with us as a PhD student focused on the global and colonial context of Sloane's herbarium. Brad also helped to assemble an inventory of the herbarium's many and varied folios, which involved examining and recording metadata on every one. And he also used Dandy as a starting point to think about the people and place. Through those projects, we've now published a number of data sets that are freely accessible on our data portal. This is the vegetable substances data set. We've got a transcription of the entries, linked to pages that our colleagues in the library have now posted on their library and archive viewer, and links to the specimens where they survive with images where they have been imaged so far. We've tried making searching for people and places more straightforward, standardizing fields, and resolving catalogue issues. So, for example, Sloane used EDEM very often to refer to as above. And of course, we needed to kind of be able to help people through that to find everything from a particular place or everything by a particular person. For the herbarium, we put together an inventory of the 41,000 folios with metadata, and then we integrated the information on people and place. And it's not that exciting, but if you do a search on that, this, for example, shows you the 463 folios that are in the herbarium that have a place in the Caribbean recorded on them. The taxonomic index to the collection was a bit of a challenge, as you can probably appreciate. It's a complex mix of printing and handwritten editions, and the accuracy of those handwritten editions is absolutely critical. And we were really lucky to be able to work with colleagues at UCL in the Sloane Lab project to develop tools to select the text we needed, transcribe them, associate them, and then verify the data. And that verification step was actually really time consuming and highly iterative. So the data set, a catalogue to the herbarium using pre-Linnaean names, includes more than 17,500 polynomials, 40,000 specimens. And this just shows you a search on Ficus indica, which shows you where the prickly pears are. So there are 20 prickly pears in the herbarium, including that one collected by the Duchess of Beaufort. There's still a huge amount to do. When I submitted the abstract for this talk, I hope to be showing you an integrated data set, all singing, all dancing. We haven't quite got there. One of the lessons learned from this project, I think, is that things take much longer than you expect, no matter how much you plan. The project has pushed my data skills, and in turn, I think I've pushed Excel to its limits. The blue circle of death became an all too familiar friend of mine until I switched my approach to handling those data, which was a really steep learning curve. And I think increasingly I've come to realise that my curatorial work is as much about the data as it is about the physical objects, and I suspect that's going to be true for all of us moving forward. Collaborating with Vicky and Brad and our colleagues from UCL with different disciplinary backgrounds to mine has been really productive, really helping to challenge my assumptions and disciplinary norms. I'm a taxonomist. I've worked with herbarium specimens for a long time, but I have a particular way of thinking about those data, perhaps, that fits with the Darwin core or the GBIF model. One of our vegetable substances was described as a gum or resin from an Indian druggist by Dr. Adair. So who are the people who collected that? Who do you record? Who's recorded by in your database field? We recorded an Indian druggist and Dr. Adair in our people field. We haven't tried to map that yet to our collections management system. We learned a lot about Sloane's botanical collections. From the process, we could see how heterogeneous they are. We can also see where they were collected from, and I think you can see some really strong patterns that you might expect for such a collection. And that in turn raised new and interesting questions. I mean, what do those dots on the map actually mean? Are those dots an accurate representation of a place where a plant was collected? What was happening in those localities where those plants were collected? And that's led to a new project that is looking to try and understand place in this early modern herbarium, collaborating with a historical geographer and a biogeographer to try and understand place data. Data that are available, of course, aren't necessarily accessible, and that's certainly true of the data we've generated. In essence, a whole set of freely available large spreadsheets. So we've tried to produce some guides to help people through them. There's still a lot to do. And the next step is we're going to be hopefully collaborating with colleagues at Reading University in their film department on producing some video guides to help people navigate through. Last slide. But despite the limitations, the data are generating new collaborations and new lines of inquiry. Vicky, along with Miranda Lowe, who's here in the audience today, supervised a 6-month placement by PhD student Akasia Pirai-Sosai, who used the vegetable substances data to research plants used by enslaved women to control their fertility as an act of resistance. It was a fascinating project made possible by these new data, and one that now features in the interpretation of our museum's central hall. I've always thought of Sloane's botanical collections as a meeting place for different disciplines. Collaborations across those different disciplines have been key to our efforts to open up these collections and hopefully go some way towards satisfying the desire of those curious about them. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mark. Does anyone have any questions?
So I was going to ask you what kind of software you use to map that handwriting. Do you know?
So to map it, no, I don't, is the honest answer. So our colleagues at UCL, in digital humanities at UCL, actually came up with the software to actually compartmentalize those different text blocks that we needed to. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so our colleagues at UCL came up with the program to actually separate the text into the blocks that we needed. And we spent quite a lot of time trying to come up with approaches to transcribe the handwriting using transcribers and so on. We weren't successful. It sounds like it's moved on a lot in 3 years, actually, which is really exciting. And the accuracy of those is so important as well. So we actually ended up just manually transcribing those. And then the verification process was so important.
Software like this is going to be more and more important for all of us across a variety of different collections. And I just wondered if there was any coherence to any of this work, because everyone's doing it slightly in silos. Is that right? Everyone's doing something themselves, and it'd be so nice to get together to do something a bit more cohesive.
I think it's developing fast, isn't it? And I think it is at that kind of experimental stage where different people are trying out different things, and some things are working really well and others not. And so perhaps we haven't quite got to the point yet where we've got the toolbox. But I think that also some of the sort of new projects that are developing, Riches, Disco, hopefully these are also going to be providing us with some of the tools that are going to help us take these tasks forward.
Okay, brilliant. The other thing to do is tell NATSCA what you're doing in a talk, a NATSCA conference. That works as well. Okay, has anyone got any last questions for Mark before we move on? Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much. I wondered, do you have any tips on publishing the data sets? Has that been done through GBIF?
We're really lucky in that we can publish them through our data portal at the Natural History Museum. Yeah, I realise not everyone has that. I'd be really interested to know what things might develop again out of Riches and Disco. I know that Riches are looking to aggregate data on heritage data sets, so that's definitely worth exploring. At the moment, we've got a small project with colleagues again from UCL to get our vegetable substances data into the Heritage Science Data Service. So that might be one opportunity.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Mark. That was brilliant.